Okay, let's start now. So welcome to the national workshop of the VIRTEU research project focusing on the Greek jurisdiction. I'm Dr. Costantino Grasso. I'm associate professor in business law at the Manchester Law School, and I serve as the principal investigator for this research project. I would like to thank all the participants for getting involved in this event, which is particularly important in the context of our research. VIRTEU is a multidisciplinary international research project funded by the European Commission. It aims at exploring the interconnections between tax crimes and corruption, with the intent to reveal in-depth relations between fraudulent and corrupt practices in the area of taxation. In order to achieve the research objectives, at VIRTEU, we are conducting a series of activities such as background research, which was carried out to collect and analyze all essential information that constituted the project's foundation, interaction with high-level experts, including both our national leading experts and research associates, as well as a series of roundtables, seminars, and other academic events aimed at discussing the most burning issues that have emerged as a result of our research activities. Finally, we are organizing a series of national workshops, just like the one we are about to begin today, which are aimed at obtaining essential feedback on the research outcomes. We're also preparing an online questionnaire aimed at professional experts in the subject matter, which we will send you at some point over the course of the next few weeks. We will be very grateful if you can take the time to go through it. Today's workshop serves a great purpose to the research project's framework. Through a series of questions, the members of the national expert panel will be called upon to provide critical evaluations based on their professional experience about the relations between tax crimes and corruption. The discussion will aim at shedding light on systemic weaknesses within the context of contrasting such criminal phenomena from a legal and practical perspective. Given the lack of time and how important it is to cover all research objectives and also to avoid running over time, I'd like to ask that everyone make an effort to limit their answer to time to 1 or 2 minutes tops. On that note, I would like to specify that it won't be necessary to offer the description of the regulatory framework. The work of our national leading experts for Greece, Dr. Vasileios Petropoulos, who is a criminal lawyer and a VIRTEU leading expert for the Greek jurisdiction, already fills in those gaps. If necessary, you may reference to relevant pieces of regulation, and you can always send us the related supporting material, which we will review in the context of research. For that very reason, I would like to ask you to provide precise and concise answers in order to offer the necessary critical analysis to tackle and identify the specific issues addressed in the questions. During the actual debate, it won't be necessary for all experts to contribute to each and every question. Please feel free to intervene where you believe it's important to share your knowledge and professional experience. The discussion will be divided into 2 parts, lastly roughly 1 hour each. The first part, the first 6 questions will be moderated by the project co-investigator, Dr. Lorenzo Pasculli, who serves as Associate Head for Research at Coventry Law School. Then, after a short break, I will take on the second part of the discussion from questions number 7 to number 12. Now, I would like to introduce our panel of national experts in alphabetical order, and I would like to thank them again for being with us. Dr. Ioannis Blastas is Financial Crime Unit of North Greece. Dr. Ioannis Moronzinis, lawyer and adjunct lecturer at the Law School of the Democritus University, Thrace. Antonios Paltas, lawyer and member of the NGO Transparency Greece, a former assistant of the Special Ministerial Agency Against Corruption. Dr. Christos Naintos, financial prosecutors of Thessaloniki, and Dr. Dimitrios Voulgaris, lawyer and adjunct lecturer at the Athens Law School. In order to make the experience even more valuable, we invited another panel, which is the panel of experts associated with the research project that will interact with the national experts for the mere purpose of stimulating and supplementing the discussion. I shall go ahead and introduce the panel of experts associated with the project, again in alphabetical order. So we have Professor Nikos Passas, a professor of criminology and criminal justice at the Northeastern University and VIRTEU area leading expert for criminology. Dr. Vasileios Petropoulos, a criminal lawyer at Ovadias and Amias law firm and VIRTEU national leading expert for Greece. Dr. Donato Vozza, Pro-Tax Research Associate in Economic Crime at the Center for Financial Corporate Credit of Covenant University. Project experts, unlike members of the National Expert Panel, won't actively participate in the discussion, but they will get involved by asking national experts some additional questions when needed. This way, we'll be able to enrich the discussion whilst abiding by the time restriction we have set ourselves. Basically, after each of our research objective, the moderator will ask the project experts if they wish to intervene in order to stimulate further discussion or clarify key points they think they are relevant. I would also like to thank Engin Erken and Stephen Holden, who serves as research assistants within the project VIRTEU and currently PhD candidates. Finally, I would like to give a special and most sincere thank you to Vasileios Petropoulos for his crucial support in organizing this event. A final note on the GDPR, I would like to thank all of you who have already provided us with the signed filming and photography consent form. If you can, please send the form to us at your earliest convenience. This would be really appreciated. Anyway, your participation in today's session entails your implicit consent to the publication of recordings, as well as extracts of it on websites, online platforms, and social networks used by the research project or by third parties with whom we have established a partnership. I will now give the floor to Dr. Pasculi to begin the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Costa. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. I will go straight to the point because the time is really strict today. So the way I will go about the questions is the way we have decided and we tested in other workshops. I will present the general question and I will lead you through each of the relevant sub-questions that make the biggest question. You're free to intervene whenever you want. Keep it, as Costa said, in 2 minutes maximum. And there will be time later on to expand, and the panel experts might also prompt some further ideas. So don't worry, there will be time for everyone. You don't have to answer all the questions. If you don't feel comfortable, don't worry, we'll let the others speak. So you're not supposed to be expert in any of these areas, in all of these areas at the same time. So don't worry. First question concerns the tax crimes, the phenomenon of tax crimes in Greece. The general question is, we want to know what tax crimes are there, what are the most frequent ones, and what are the interactions with different countries. So let's have a look to the sub-questions. The first one is, what behaviors and what practices are criminalized in Greece as tax offenses? Can you make a short list? So I think Ioannis is first. Ioannis, floor to you. You're muted.
I know, but I raised my hand.
I see.
Okay. Thank you very much. So in Greece, in general, we could say that in every other country in the world, tax evasion is an illegal behavior involving fraud or concealment of facts from the tax administration. It's actually a kind of fraud. The tax evader, the perpetrator, conceals facts or states false facts in order to take a refund, and that's the general idea. But there is not only one kind of tax offenses in Greece, because there is a duplicity, and I will elaborate further in the second round about that, because a serious amount of tax offenses falls under the provisions of smuggling. Through the smuggling offense, a serious portion of tax offenses is brought before the Greek courts, especially involving the excise duties or sales taxes. All sales taxes in Greece, these special sales taxes, are fall under the provisions are prosecuted under the provisions of the Greek National Customs Code. It's smuggling, actually. It's a form of tax evasion that is considered smuggling, and that's this in general. That's how we prosecute in general the tax offenses in Greece.
I think that's very.
I think I concluded my 2 minutes.
Yeah,
so
I mean, but also it's very complete. So well done, thank you, Ioannis. That's very clear, very interesting. The provision of smuggling. I might have some questions later, but let's ask anyone else first if they have any comments. Antonis, do you want to go?
Yes, I'd like to add that it's a special offense to avoid paying VAT. The VAT fraud is a different provision, and moreover, there is an auxiliary offense, which is the issuance or accepting falsified or fake invoices, which might be punished as of itself, or its punishment might subside if there is a basic tax avoidance. Just for adding to Ioannis' statement.
Fantastic, thank you. Anyone else? Good. So we can, yeah, Dimitrios.
I just, sorry, I just, in order to give the main structure of the law and the criminal offenses, I would just like to say that there is a specific article, Article 66 of the law 4173, and there it foresees the main tax evasion crimes. And so in order to have the main picture, we have tax evasion regarding income taxes, VAT taxes, and other withholding taxes. So these are the main tax crimes, but there is also another paragraph in the same article regarding the falsified, the forgery of invoices. This crime has not, it doesn't need to take place in connection with tax evasion, so it may or it has to do nothing with tax evasion, and this is a problem. Maybe we will come to that again later. And what that somebody must have in mind about the tax crimes in Greece is that there are specific amounts of money that has to be in order to have a tax crime. There should be the offense should be above a specific amount of money. For instance, 50,000 euros regarding VAT and 100,000 euros regarding the other income taxes. So this is the main picture. That's what I would like to say.
Very, very clear. Thank you. Christos.
I would like to say those that Mr. Vulgari said, that we have certain amounts of money above which the behavior is criminalized. So during the period of economic crisis in Greece, for example, VAT criminalization took place from the first euro owed to the state. So every VAT offense, let's say, was criminalized. It was from the first euro crime. Okay, now the behavior is a crime. The omission is a crime from 50,000 euros per year. Okay, and as far as income tax is involved, this behavior, this omission, to be specific, is criminalized from 100,000 euros per year. Okay, so it is difficult to have today such tax crimes, or to make a comparison with the past of the economic crisis. We don't have so many tax crimes as in the past because of the limits of the euros owed to the state. Thank you.
Ioannis, please go ahead.
Yes, hello from me. A critical note here that tax crimes are usually connected and characterized as money laundering offenses. And this is for a variety of reasons. The first reason is because of the statute of limitation for money laundering. It's over 20 years. And actually, there is a mixed approach about tax crimes and money laundering. Usually, they tend to characterize every tax crime as money laundering offense.
Very, very interesting, very important. Thank you, Ioannis. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on with the other questions for this group. So, what tax crimes are the most frequent in your jurisdiction? I mean, what kind of tax crimes are committed more frequently in your jurisdiction? If you can give me a short list and put them in order of what you think is the priority. If you don't know, well, I think Ioannis has raised his hand.
Yes. In the past 10 years, can you hear me? Okay. In the past 10 years, the reality in Greece is overtaxation. And in a country where there is overtaxation, it is, I think it is safe to say that the evasion of paying income tax becomes a necessity for some people because they cannot, otherwise they cannot cover their expenses for living. So that's something that we have experienced in the past 10 years due to the crisis in Greece. But there is also an extensive VAT tax evasion, which correlates, of course, with the income tax evasion, since both depend on the failure to fully report the taxable earnings.
Excellent. Thank you, Ioannis.
And smuggling is always the tax evasion, which is related to smuggling, is always a reality in Greece, was always, because Greece is a gate to the European Union. So, yes. There is an extensive tax evasion through smuggling because we're an import state. We're the gate to the European Union. We have harbors, and I think that's natural too.
Excellent. Thank you. I think Nikos has a question. Nikos, if it's on this, we'll have it now. Otherwise, if it's a new question or a new topic, we'll keep it for the end of this small session.
No, it is actually a clarification on a point raised around the previous question, and especially the issue that Yannis raised on the money laundering. I just wanted to be clear on the relationship between money laundering and tax offenses. I suspect that tax offenses would be considered predicate offenses for money laundering. If the statute of limitations is longer for money laundering and shorter for the predicate offense, can money laundering charges stand even if the predicate can no longer be prosecuted?
I think that's the case if anybody
that's always the case. And I may add to that sometimes money laundering is only a procedural instrument in the hands of the authorities because they can make arrests. It's they can make swift arrests through money laundering, so they use it always, even if there is not even if there isn't any, because when you do not pay income tax, how can we have earnings in order to launder? There is nothing. You just don't pay.
This is very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Ioannis first and then Antonis.
Yes, actually, there isn't a need to be the predicate offense to have a final decision. The money laundering can have the suspicion of conducting the tax criminal offense. So the 20 years for money laundering, I think that Nikos was this question regarding. After the 5 years of statute of limitation for tax crimes has passed and there is no conviction, money laundering investigation can proceed because you have to rely and prove the suspicion of conducting the tax crime.
Excellent. Thank you, Antonis.
Yes, very quickly, from the procedural point of view of the tax authority or SDOE, if there is suspicion of tax evasion, usually they are obliged, if I am not wrong, to the FIU of Greece, the Hellenic FIU, as a suspicion for money laundering. Therefore, we have a very big number of reports of suspected money laundering with tax evasion as a predicate offense.
Marvelous. The conversation is going really well. Thank you all. That's really fantastic. Moving on. What transnational tax crimes, so as someone mentioned before, crimes that go beyond the borders of Greece, involve most frequently Greece? If you can, again, give me a short list. Dimitris, was that a hand raised?
I just smiled because Ioannis just talked about smuggling before, and I think that's the case here. I think other kind of Ioannis will say something more, I suppose, about that. But other kind of tax crimes regarding transnational seems, I think, something like carousel VAT fraud or something like this is not so often seen, at least in the criminal courts of Greece. I mean, at least as far as I know.
Thank you. Very helpful. Ioannis?
Yes, as I said before, Greece is the gate to the European Union. So if some other state that doesn't have harbors, for example, like our neighbors in Bulgaria, they don't have harbors. So all imported goods through the seaways come through Greece, and therefore a very common carousel scheme involving a missing trader is affected this way. That means somebody imports goods to the European Union through Greece. He says that these goods are transit. That means they will immediately ship out to another EU member state, usually Bulgaria, or other states that are neighbors of Greece through, not through the seaway, but through land. So, but there is actually no supplier to pay the VAT tax. So it's a very common VAT tax evasion case, but this case falls under the provision of smuggling. This VAT tax evasion is prosecuted through the provisions of smuggling, not the tax evasion provisions of the tax procedure code.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you. So you're saying, if I understand correctly from my notes, that the carousel schemes are actually perpetrated, but they fall within smuggling, so they're not qualified as.
When they
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, when they involve imported goods.
When they involve
imported goods, when there are duties to be paid, the VAT tax which goes along the duties, so the VAT tax of imported goods falls under the provision of smuggling. Like every other excise duty and every other sales tax, all these tax evasion cases are referred to the provisions of smuggling, not the named as tax evasion offenses. It is smuggling in Greece. And as I've said, I will elaborate for the problems that this duplicity creates in the second round.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you. Nikos, I would ask you just to wait until we finish this round. We have just 2 questions. So if you can hold the question, then we'll catch up with the other project experts. So we do everything in order. Otherwise, we get messed up with the notes. Sorry for that. So next question. What foreign countries are most frequently involved in transnational crimes with Greece? So we just discussed these transnational forms of criminality. What are the countries that are most involved with these crimes? If you have an idea, if you don't, we'll move on. Christos.
Well, first of all, we have many smuggling cases with cigarettes from Bulgaria. Okay, illegal cigarettes. We have, there are many cases with money laundering concerning Cyprus as well. There are also many cases concerning money laundering concerning other small states, offshore and so on, with offshores. I will agree with Ioannis, who said that financial crimes with transnational character are mainly prosecuted as smuggling cases. Now that we have a European Prosecutor office, I suppose that many more cases will come in the foreground concerning VAT fraud with transnational character, because VAT fraud with transnational character is huge, and we cannot prove it because we don't have the element of cooperation, transnational cooperation, and it is very difficult to have the necessary information for this. Okay, although you might have the necessary information, it is very difficult to prove that there is a fraud taking place concerning VAT between, for example, Greece and Bulgaria or other states of the European Union. It is very difficult to prove because we don't have the level of cooperation that we should. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Christos. I think these answers, Ioannis?
Yes, may I add Russia is involved during the last few years in real estate properties and tax crimes relating to this, and they usually prefer a method of prepaid cards and to move their funds and
Excellent. Final sub-question for this round is, what are the most relevant tax crimes in your jurisdiction in terms of amount of money evaded? So whether they're national or transnational offenses, what we're looking at this moment is the amount of money evaded. What is the kind of offense that evades most money?
May I?
Go on, Chris. Yep.
The crime of false invoices is a huge crime in Greece because companies issue big amounts of false invoices. I mean, when I say big amount, I mean much money of the very that is written on the invoice. Okay, and this behavior is taking place in order to be able to receive back VAT from the state. That is a very common behavior of many companies, even companies that do not exist. Okay, and companies that do not exist are issuing these false invoices with huge amounts written on them, and they receive VAT. And this crime, receiving VAT back, although they shouldn't, this amount of money can be the fortune, can be the fortune of the basic crime of the criminal, let's say, can be the fortune of the money laundering. Then this money that is received from the state can present the money of money laundering, because only saving money, only cost saving, let's say, cannot be the basis and the fortune and the money that is then the money of money laundering. I don't know if I am understood. Okay, yes. Because not all crime, although the list of crimes in money laundering comprises many crimes, not all of them are able to make money that is laundered, let's say. Okay, as far as tax crimes are concerned, only receiving back the money from false invoices, okay, this money can be the basis of money laundering, not owing money to the state just for another reason. Okay, this is a very important issue.
Excellent. That's really technically interesting. Fabulous. Antonis.
Yes, so just to add on Mr. Naido's line of thinking, we begin with false invoices in order to achieve VAT fraud, and then we go on to money. The situation proceeds to money laundering. So I think the point is that in Greece, a lot of complex situations are taking place. It's a combination of the main tax crimes.
Fabulous. Okay, I think we are now ready to move to the project experts. I'm sorry, Vassilios and Nikos, if I had you waiting. I think we can start from Nikos, because I think he had a question on a specific point, perhaps. Nikos.
Yeah, thank you. On the question of transnational offenses, I was wondering if the group of experts could say something about the illegal use of offshore jurisdictions. I know that there were Greek names in some of the lists that were published abroad, and I do not know how they were handled and under what statutes in Greece. Also, with respect to general offenses, I assume that abuse of gifts, inheritance, and related kind of transactions are part of the statutes on false declarations to the authorities to misrepresent revenue. In that category, is there any special provision for the abuse of the non-profit status of organizations that operate in Greece? Or is it a separate topic that we need to include? That's it.
No one? Well, if there is no answer on that, we can move on. Sorry, Nikos, that we didn't get an answer on this, but that's expected in the nature of the workshop. Antonis, were you trying to say something?
Well, I tried to say the following, that offshore companies are used or mostly investigated in terms of money laundering. And there were people with lists, and not mostly, as I think, as a vehicle for tax evasion. Mostly the predicate offenses were corruption-related offenses, and the offshore companies used as vehicles for the money laundering. Now, I don't know. I'm not aware. I'm not familiar if there is a special tax evasion with the use of offshore vehicles. Probably there is, and we could see the accounts from abroad as means of information for tax evasion, not so as means of the tax evasion itself. But these are generalities. It's not something that I'm directly familiar of.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonis. Ioannis?
Actually, I wouldn't like to leave this question unanswered about the lists, but in order to answer the list-related question, we should open a very larger issue, that is if we are allowed to take into consideration illegal evidence, because all of these lists are illegal in their origin. They are illegal evidence. How are they usable? Are they usable in court? Actually, I think that Christos' dissertation is about this thing. How can we, if we are allowed to use illegal evidence like that? Now, there were some provisions in Greece. But in my opinion, this provision that allows to use this evidence, which derives from other offenses, this evidence derives from criminal offenses, in my opinion, is due to the provision of the Article 19 of the Greek Constitution, illegal, and they are inadmissible as evidence in the Greek courts. But
Excellent.
we had to discuss many hours in order to solve this issue. I think that's why we cannot answer it in a very absolute way.
Of course. Christos, very quickly, because we are really spending a lot of time on this question, we need to crack on, and we still have Vasileios.
What I wanted to say is that these lists to which Ioannis is referring are bank lists from banks abroad. Okay, they are not lists of offshore companies. So what are these cases? The Greek prosecutor is informed that one, for example, a doctor, let's say, has 1,100 euros in Switzerland. Okay, and then he didn't write this to his in his tax declaration. So in this way, we have matters of illegally obtained evidence, because we need somehow we need special provisions in order to win, let's say, the bank claiming that they don't give any information about all this.
Yes. Thank you, Christos. Very helpful. Basileios, very rapidly, please.
I think everything is said now. I don't want to add something. I think we should go on round two. Just to say that there is also another VAT crime now against the interests of the European Union. We are all aware of that. The whole idea is the same, so I will say nothing more. I'll just leave you continue with the second round.
Thank you, Vasileios. Much appreciated. We're really running late. So for the second round, I will cut the answers to 1 minute because I see that you all answer and you're all keen to participate. This is amazing. And this is the best workshop so far because you are communicating a lot. In other workshops, not everyone feels like answering, so which is also fine, but it's great. So we need to stay in 1 minute.
Just to say something, I took the opportunity to say a big thank you to Christos Naidos, because my network was had problems. So also from my point, thank you very much, because I know that he's a prosecutor, has a lot of things to do. But thank you very much, Christos, for being with us. And of course, thank you to everyone once more. Sorry.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vasileios, and thank you, everyone. So question number 2 is about, and I think some of the issues you mentioned already related to this question, is about the complexity of the legal system and the adequacy of the legal definitions. So what we would like to assess in this question is the main legal framework that is concerning taxes in general, so the tax law, and the law relating tax offenses, so the criminal tax law, and assess the efficiency of this legislation in countering, in addressing illegal practices. So the first sub-question is about the complexity of the tax system in your jurisdiction. How would you assess the overall complexity of the tax system in Greece, and how do you think it can perhaps facilitate tax evasion or any fraudulent tax practices, and if you have some examples about this? Ioannis?
Yes, as we already said, it's quite complex. Let me give you an example about tax evasion or tax crime from a company. If he has some VAT revenue that he's obliged to return it back to the state, and he keeps it in his bank accounts. There is generally an approach that this is a basic offense, a principal offense for money laundering. Here, the philosophy of the money laundering crime is that knowing that this is illegal revenue, and the transformation and the willing to break the chain of funds, so as the investigator is not being able to find out where the money goes. Just having the money in his bank account does not qualify it as a money laundering crime. So it's actually, as I said before, a complexity about the meaning of money laundering and tax crime, the definition of them.
So definitions of crimes are not really easy for prosecutors. Any other points? What about the complexity of, Christos, go for it.
Yeah, well, the main task lies to the tax authority, the main task. So they are making all the job, all the work. What do we have in criminal courts? A smart prosecutor comes and he says, I have some things to say against the work of the tax authority. Then the criminal court has no special knowledge to reply on this. no special knowledge. So recently, the legislator came and he said, in order to avoid such phenomena and to avoid also nebis in idem problems, he said, okay, if someone attends to the tax courts, specialized tax courts, administrative courts, so the process in the criminal process is postponed, let's say, in order to receive the decision of the administrative courts. And these courts have the knowledge, not the criminal courts. The criminal courts can say if something is a crime or not, or reply on matters of criminal law and criminal procedure, but not the administrative ones. Okay, that is the problem. Many prosecutors raise matters, administrative and tax matters beyond before the criminal courts, and in this way they are achieving to make it more complex for the court to reply, and they are trying, let's say, to avoid convictions, let's say, in this way. Now that we are obliged to read first the decision of the administrative court, now the problem might be less serious than in the past. That's one.
Great, thank you very much. One question about this. What about statutes of limitations? Are they suspended until the tax administrative court has decided?
What do you mean?
The time limits for the prosecution.
They are suspended as well. They are suspended as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on, we have already started discussing this, so we can skip this question. But if you have any further points on the specificity of criminal law with respect to tax crime that you think can compromise prosecutions, in addition to what Ioannis and Christos have just said, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll move to the next question. Good. Okay, nothing about the tax system itself. Oh yes, Ioannis, go on.
Yes, I would like to add to what I've said in the first round, that this duplicity of prosecuting the tax evasion crimes through tax evasion offenses and smuggling offenses should be stricken. This goes back to an old French distinction between customs and revenue public offices. Now that all our public servants are under the umbrella of the independent public revenue authority, this distinction, this traditional distinction between customs and customs criminal law and the tax evasion and tax evasion criminal law can be now left behind. So it would be easier if we introduced the lege ferenda, if we introduced a provision like the German one of Article 370 of the Abgabenordnung of the tax law of Germany, which is the only tax offense in the Greek, in the German, in German law in general, and everything is in one provision. It is easy to read and to apply, and smuggling is only an aggravated form of tax evasion. So I think this is the road we should follow.
Fantastic, thank you very much. The next question is specifically about prosecution. I think Christos has already replied. Other questions, problems, issues that can arise with respect to the prosecution and tax crimes definition. So how can tax crime definition create problems for prosecutors apart from what we said before?
Well, in Greece, we don't have such problems because all the work is done by the tax authority. The tax authority says, this is the crime, please prosecute. Okay. So we don't have anything to do, and the whole process goes very, very quickly. that is very difficult for the defendant to raise his opinion, because the process goes directly to the court, and it is very difficult for him to reply. Okay, so as far as the pretrial state, the pretrial part of the trial is concerned, it goes very, very quickly. Okay.
Excellent. Demetrios.
Just to make clear for people that are not so familiar with the Greek system, that the report of the tax authorities is a procedural condition, let's say, for the whole criminal procedure. So the whole criminal procedure is based on the report of the tax authorities. So that's
very important. Yeah, thank you very much. That's an important clarification. Any other points on this, Ioannis?
A small addition to that, if I may add that's the main reason for corruption for tax-related corruption, because if the criminal court depends so much on the report of the tax authority, then there are many reasons for the tax evader to try to corrupt the public servant, and there are many reasons for the public servant that writes this report to be corrupted. So the main reason is this strict dependence of the criminal liability on the tax authority's report, because the judge does not have the financial knowledge to understand this. He's not a tax judge. He's a criminal judge. He cannot understand it. And that's a reason that harbors corruption or harbored corruption in the past in the Greek tax system.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to the point of Ioannis, is that because the tax authority is very heavily burdened, it does not have the means to investigate every possible or suspected tax evasion. So they have a system of prioritization using risk assessments, which are not known, and they have to investigate 26,000 cases per year, not cases, persons, TIN, tax identification numbers per year. So I haven't heard anything of this situation being corrupted. However, their means are subjected to this precondition. They cannot exceed. If the financial prosecutors are interested to do so, they have some investigators who could be put forth to proceed to the investigation, but even in this situation, their findings are subject to the decision of the report of the tax authority that Dimitrios described also correctly.
Well, that's interesting. So basically, the tax authority always has the last word. There's no way for the prosecutor to appeal or to challenge the decision of the tax authority or the prosecution.
There are some systems for coordination. It's a bit obscure law, and I'm not very aware that it is a law of 2018. I'm not sure if this coordination happens in a concrete and basic way. Maybe the practitioners would like to add something, and I'm glad that Ioannis Blatsos.
Yes, thank you, Antonis. Ioannis.
I have to pinpoint that these are about the majority of these cases is administrative cases, not a criminal one. The criminal cases they have a different approach in the investigation.
Okay, so the tax report as a precondition for prosecution is only for administrative offenses. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the prioritization and the independent authority, tax authority, is usually about tax crimes and in the administrative measures and courts. In the criminal investigation, there is a different approach. There is a coordination between the prosecutor and the investigation officer, and they have, let's say, a common approach to the investigation of the case.
Understood. Thank you, Ioannis. We need to move on. So I think we can skip the last question, which is how does the overall tax crimes or illegal framework contribute to investigations? I think the vast majority of you have already answered to this. So project experts, Nikos, Vasileios, Donato, and Stephen, if you have any questions. Donato.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lorenzo and Costa, for having invited me as an external expert of the products project at this interesting VIRTEU event. I have just a brief question for the experts about the investigation of transnational VFT fraud in the European Union. As we know, Greece is a country that has joined the European Public Prosecutor's Office. And regarding a VAT fraud, that is one of core offenses against the EU's financial interests, the European Public Prosecutor's Office is competent for related investigations if the crime is connected with the territory of one or more member states and involves a total damage of at least 10 million. As you may know, the European Commission shall assess next year whether this threshold is appropriate. What are the critical issues related to the EPPO's jurisdiction restricted to VAT fraud of at least 10 million? How do you think this threshold could affect the fight against VAT fraud in Greece? What would you suggest to the European Commission? Is 10 million euro threshold fine from your perspective, or should it be reduced? What might be the amount, and for what reason you suggest eventually an amendment to the PIF Directive? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donato.
I will be very brief. The general comment that I have regarding earlier discussions on the disclosure of names and lists and the legality or illegality of the evidence is a procedural matter. The fact of the matter is that there were Greeks who had money abroad, which suggests that this is a practice. And if it is not okay by Greek law, what laws are used against it when it is discovered? The revelation, legal or illegal again, of this list suggests that there is a dark figure of this kind of misconduct. So for the sake of completeness, it would be good to have something about what laws apply to such eventualities and what statute of limitations apply. Also, with respect to whether these are treated as primarily corruption offenses, someone gets a bribe and the payment is made overseas, that still constitutes income that under Greek law, I assume, is also taxable. So it would be both a corruption offense and a tax evasion offense and money laundering because it is concealed and used for other purposes. So again, here the question is, as a matter of practice, are all these charges usually get applied, or do prosecutors pick and choose which ones are more likely to go through the courts? What is the strategy? Also, for the sake of completeness, I think that the question of how one might abuse a non-profit status, charity or an NPO that operates for research or other purposes, I think that we know from the international literature that this is typically abused. And the question is, how would that be handled under Greek law? And finally, this is more of a system and political kind of question. I know that the creation of the independent body, the independent authority on revenue, has created a lot of grief within the government and certain parts of the political body. And the question is who controls it and how well it works with the national authorities that are under more direct control of the government or the parliament. When the system is described and the specificities of Greece with this respect, because this was a a measure that was introduced under pressure from outside, I think it would be an important contextual factor on how the revenue offenses are handled now in the new regime and where there may be room for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikos. Sounds great. So we have two big questions from Donato and Nikos. Ioannis.
Well, I would like to answer to Nikos first. It must be taken into consideration that the handling of these lists belong to the past, meaning that these amounts of money cannot be exported from Greece like they were exported before. So we're talking about cases that cannot happen anymore. The international cooperation of the European banking system has put an end to that. So we're talking about some cold cases now. The first issue is that the procedural issue is very important because we cannot pursue justice with any means possible, and especially when it's not allowed from our national constitution. So it's a very important issue if we can or cannot use them. About the non-profit organizations, of course, if a non-profit organization is a profit organization, it's a legal entity that makes profit and does not declare profit, it's income tax evasion. There is no problem to that. Every income tax evasion, the income tax evasion offense apply, and I think that last week a relevant trial of some non-profit organization officials was concluded with some severe sentencing about it. So I think I didn't left anything out.
I think we still have out the threshold of 10 million for VAT fraud in Europe. If anyone wants to respond to that.
Well, Dimitris.
No, actually, what I would like to say is that I don't have a certain opinion about 10 million. I think it's quite a big amount of money, but that's it is mostly a matter of European Union and how much European Union wants to intervene in such a intervene, or I don't know, take the responsibility for such crimes. Because it doesn't mean that less amount of money, so tax evasion regarding less amount of money is not criminal. It's criminal, but according to national, or it's being, the procedure is according to the national criminal code. What I wanted to say about the European prosecutor is that at least as far as I have seen, there is a big problem regarding the structure and the way that the public prosecutor is going to be implemented. I don't think that both systems, so the European and the national one, are pretty compatible, because I think the European Union has in mind that the prosecutor is, so to say, the master of the criminal procedure, at least at the preliminary stage, and that is not always the case in Greece. So I don't know if it is pretty compatible with the Greek system, and I think that's also the reason why the last law regarding the implementation of the European prosecutor and the national, let's say, European prosecutors doesn't have a lot of provisions, material provisions regarding the concrete implementation of the public prosecutor. So that's from my point of view.
Dimitris, one question is about, you said that the difficult compatibility with the EU prosecutor and the Greek system. Is that related particularly to the role of the tax authorities, or do you mean more generally?
No, I mean, in Greece, for instance, for severe felonies or for felonies in general, the the prosecution, or at least there is the responsibility lies mainly on a judge that is doing the whole preliminary investigation. While the European law provides for certain responsibilities of the prosecutor that is not always possible. For instance, I think the European law says that the prosecutor should be able to impose some preliminary measures, and this is not always possible according to the Greek criminal procedure, because this is mainly a responsibility of a judge and not of the prosecutor, at least from a certain point on.
Understood. Thank you very much. We need to move on to the next question. This is a cluster of different questions. This is a more complex round, but that will allow us to go a bit quickly. So this question concerns the various types of action against tax crime: prevention, investigation, enforcement, sanctions, recoveries, and other remedies. So what we want to do about these various stages, Christos, I'm coming, just finishing clarifying this, is to understand the potential deficiencies of these various stages that can be exploited or that can perhaps hinder tax evasion, tax practices if they are illegal, and so on and so forth. So weaknesses and even strengths of the overall regime against tax offenses. Christos.
What I wanted to say was something to add to the EPO before, if I may.
Yeah, very, very quickly, because time is really running, sorry.
Okay. EPO, the European prosecutor must create cases, because VAT cases are so many with transnational character, but they are not investigated at the moment because of the lack of means. Olaf and asset recovery offices throughout Europe must cooperate in order to find out huge amounts of money of VAT cases. Okay, there is no other way to find out, no other way to investigate. That is my opinion. And now, what you could you please? That is what I wanted to say. To your question, could you please? You told us about the problems. In my opinion, tax crimes should be the most serious ones. Okay, we don't need the criminal law for every tax evasion. How it's said. We need criminal law only for serious crimes. Okay, and
criminal law is a last resort. Yes.
Yes. And also that creates many problems with nebis in idem and so on, because the perpetrators then attend to the European court, and the European court always says we have a problem with these double sanctions. Okay, so in my opinion, we shouldn't have so many tax fraud cases before the criminal court. Administrative courts are more specialized to handle such.
Excellent, thank you, Ioannis. Is this about the previous question? Is this about, because I still have to specify the sub questions? Both. Okay, so leave the one for the new question later. Tell us quickly what about the previous session.
About the answer to Nikos.
Yeah.
What he asked, there were cases that individuals had illegal revenues in offshore bank accounts, and from the lists they were defined and described, but due to the characterization of the tax crime, the tax evasion only, the statute of limitation had expired, and so he couldn't have been prosecuted. But if he was handled as a corruption case, because the illegal revenues were related, supposedly, to bribes or corruption acts, then the statute of limitation wouldn't have been expired. And also, a note here that for corruption offenses, there is, from the Greek Penal Code, a formal complaint to be, in order to be prosecuted, a prerequisite. So about your question, I may answer, or should I wait?
Let me first clarify the sub-questions. I just paused to give the floor to Christos, but I still have to tell you what is the first question. So the first question is whether there is a legal duty for public institutions in Greece to prevent tax crimes through non-criminal, non-restrictive measures, such as education, information campaigns, training. Is there a positive legal obligation to do all this? If there is not, is there any sort of soft guidance, regulation that encourages at least institutions to prevent tax fraud? Ioannis?
The soft measures are the code of conduct, the code of ethics, and all these codes. And there are also not for tax crimes, but for money laundering cases, obliged entities, supervising entities, should train their members and train them and educate them about the dangers or the risks of money laundering and prevention of this.
This is for private institutions, or this is also for public institutions?
Both.
Both, okay, good. Any other answers? No? Good. Second question moves to another kind of instrument against tax fraud, which is particularly instruments of leniency, such as tax amnesties, tax exemptions, reductions, discounts, deferred payment policies. So all these instruments are helping or are compromising the investigation, the prosecution of tax offenses.
I'd like to take the floor. Tax amnesties in returning taxes and be acquitted of tax evasion was used in the previous years. In the last 10 years, after Greece went in the programs phase and the memoranda and so on, have been lessened considerably. There was one major tax amnesty program in 2018. However, the case law of the Council of State changed and it granted amnesty in a lot of cases. So it neither raised revenue nor helped with the tax thinking of paying.
Investigations, yes. So it has become more frequently in the last 2 years. Is that what you mean?
No, it has been once, the tax amnesty program in 2018. Okay. And now we don't have. The thing that it is going on now is if the tax debts are paid in larger period of times with monthly payments, extended ones, like tax debts now, but as tax debts, not as tax evasion profits.
Okay, I see. Good. Any other points? No? Great. So these, I think, answer. Christos, did you want to say something?
I would like to add that in the Greek judicial system, especially concerning such types of crime, we have problems of temporal law, because from the time a tax crime is committed to the time that it is investigated, and then to the time that it is tried, the defendant stands before court many years later it takes place. So we have problems since criminal law is changing. We are obliged to implement the provisions that are better for the defendant throughout this temporal criminal law. And many cases are acquitted because of this great period of time between the commission of a crime and the trial. Okay, because new laws are issued, and they say, and new as Antoni said before, the jurisprudence of the administrative courts changes, and it says, okay, you have a 5 years period of time in order to find out a crime, okay, and not against the state, and not 20 years as before, and so on. And many cases are acquitted because of the delay of the process and the difficulties in finding out the crimes. That is the problem, I think.
Thank you so much for this. The next point is about payment with assets instead of money. So are tax debtors allowed to do that? And if so, can these affect investigation and prosecution? Ioannis.
I think at this point we can talk to you about the famous case here in Greece of a very well-known stylist, TV person, and modelist. And this is an actual case. He was prosecuted for tax fraud. He had property, estate, and he said, "Take everything. I want to pay my debts. I don't have cash. Take everything." There was no legal framework to do that, and this person went to jail, pre-trial detention, and then he was convicted too and spent some time in prison. Now, I think the situation remains the same today. Somebody has property. He does not have the cash to pay his debt to the Public Revenue Service. He asks to give his property away. He cannot. The property is confiscated. So the state here acts in some way unethically, because it says, "I will confiscate your property, then I will take it in. I will take it anyway. So I will not grant you any facilitation, any leniency, if you concede that you give this property away. I will take it anyway, and you will go to jail." So I think that's unpractical and in some way unethical too.
I say it's a very, very good point, a big problem. I need to ask you to be a bit shorter in your answers because we're really out of time now and we don't want to stay here all the evening of Friday. Ioannis.
Let me add to what Ioannis said, that there is a lack of an asset recovery office here in Greece in order to liquidate the confiscated assets. And just a small note here, the stocks, the stock exchange, someone, if he has an account, he can, the court can confiscate the stocks as well. Excellent.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. Let's move on. Next point is about suspicious activities report from tax authorities. Since it is so important in Greece for the prosecutor to rely on the investigation of the tax authorities. Do you think these reports are sufficient? Are they complete? Are the investigations complete? Or do you think these reports could be improved? I think there are no answers on these. I think we can still respond with the point that Christos made before about some prosecutors actually bringing then the problems in front of the judge and the judge then being confused. Good, moving on. How would you assess the penalties for tax offenses? So the sentences, the amount, do you think that deterrent enough? Do you think that too serious? Do you think they're efficiently implemented, they're really effective or not? Sanctions.
Can I take the floor? Okay, very quickly. I think that they are rather strict, but sufficiently deterrent. On the other hand, the big problem is the very slow pace of both investigation by the tax authorities and the time for the decision to come through.
Marvelous, very to the point, essential. That's what we need. Final points. First of all, how would you evaluate the system of recovery? Sorry, Dimitris, did you want to say something?
No, I think Adonis was said everything I wanted to also say.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you. How do you evaluate the system of recovery? So how do we get the money back from evaders? Are there any best practices that you want to highlight? Are there any deficiencies that you want to highlight in the recovery system? Nothing. I suppose we responded before when we talked about.
I think Jans just answered that. I think
yeah, exactly.
Answered that. But the recovery office, in order to liquidate the confiscated good, the confiscated property, and it will facilitate the defendants too, because they could apply for leniency by giving away their property.
I think, yeah, that's what I was about to say, and I think though that Christos wanted to add something to this, right?
There are many practical problems. How will we evaluate, for example, the confiscated property or the freezed property? When we have many owners of a bank account, what is the amount of the bank account that can be confiscated against a person? These practical problems are still unanswered from the Greek courts. And we have many practical problems in this field. The confiscation in Greece, although the provision of the confiscation in Article 74, if I remember well, from 2017 was adapted to the modern situation, okay, to the modern concept of confiscation. Although this took place, the courts still today are not used to applying this provision. For example, the provision that when you don't have the asset of the crime, you can confiscate legal property instead of this. The Greek courts are not used to implementing, in my opinion, the new provisions of the confiscation in order to implement asset recovery. We have an asset recovery office in Athens, in SDOE, as far as I remember, the Union Against Fraud, tax crimes and so on, money laundering. But this is only in Athens and no other place in Greece. And as far as I know, my colleagues in such cases don't know very easily how to handle the freezed bank accounts, how they can, for example, somebody is condemned for money laundering for 50,000 euros, and he is a co-owner of the bank account among other persons, and the bank account has 100,000 euros. How much money of this will be go as, for the asset recovery?
Yes.
We don't know. We don't know. These are problems that the authorities must give solutions, in my
Very
opinion.
clear. Yeah, thank you very much. Very quickly, does any of you have any idea of any further remedies apart from just recovery? Compensation of damages, anything else that can be imposed in cases of tax evasion, and if you know, also of corruption? No? Okay, let's conclude this round with the award to the project experts. Any questions from our experts from the project? Nikos, Basileios, Donato, Stephen?
Not from me, thank you.
Thank you, Nikos.
No, I'm also covered.
Good.
As you also mentioned, we have already covered most of the topics. Perhaps
excellent.
we've already covered some topics of the next questions as well.
I think so, and indeed, I would like to move to that very quickly. We have a couple of minutes left. So the final question is about vulnerabilities in various sectors of the economy. So I would ask you, the questions here are very simple, so we can go swiftly. I will ask you to identify the 3 most vulnerable sectors of the industry: construction, communication, education, energy, farming, financial sector, health, hospitality, anything that you can think of. The 3 sectors that are most vulnerable to tax crimes and tax corruption. And the second point is, if you can tell me what are the vulnerabilities, why are these sectors vulnerable? If you have examples, these are very welcome. So the most vulnerable sector, just 3 of them, and the most important vulnerabilities with some examples. Antonis, I think you're on mute.
Okay, I'd like to propose some sectors. The one is construction, because a lot of people are involved, and there is some basic, let's say, how can I describe it? Some discrepancies between the contract value, the value of immaterial goods written in contracts with the real paid assets, and that made it a very vulnerable sector. And the other one is the health providing sector, because a lot of times no receipts are given to the customers, or they are lower, and that means that gives a chance for hiding income. And this is maybe another retail sector of the free market professionals.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. Christos.
Well, we have a problem in Greece in using plastic money. In Greece, we use mainly the other money. How is it called? The coins and you know, not plastic cards, not the cards. That is the problem. That is the problem. If the legislator came in Greece and said you are obliged to use plastic money, only plastic money, then the next day huge amounts of tax evasion would be discovered, because there are many professionals, such as many doctors, many plumbers, and so on, workers who don't issue receipts. That is the problem, and nobody wants to pay the VAT. Okay, because when you need work for your car or for your house, and the worker comes and he says, you will pay 500 euros with the tax, or you will pay 400 euros without the receipt, then you have you need to be very concentrated citizen in order to pay 100 euros more to the worker. Okay, that is a huge problem. We need more plastic money. That is the case.
So black markets and black work and black money. Great. Okay, I think we covered everything. So the word to our project experts. Nikos, go for it.
I just have a question. If Greece currently has any provisions for taxing profits in cryptocurrencies?
Ioannis?
No, and I would like to pinpoint this as a form of tax evasion, as well as, for example, money services such as PayPal, or the movement of funds through post offices with travel checks, and this kind of procedures.
So that's a major risk, and it also connects with the idea of plastic money. I think that's great. I think that's all, unless Basileios has any questions. No, Donato, neither. Okay, great. We managed just in time. Well done. Thank you, everyone. That was very, very helpful. I think we have the time for 5 minutes break at least. Costa.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for moderating, and thank you for everybody. It was fascinating discussion, and unfortunately, we have a time limits, and we have to stick with that. But thank you. Yes, 5 minutes coffee break, and we will reconvene in 5 minutes for the second part. Thank you so much.